Hi everyone, we'll kick off now. I think folks will still be joining for the next couple of minutes, so I'll just run through a few very quick housekeeping pieces for this webinar today. Firstly, thank you for joining our talk on taking climate action from local to global. You'll see in the corner that this event is being recorded, so folks that maybe can't join today at lunchtime will be able to watch back. This will be posted on the Department of Foreign Affairs YouTube page, so if you enjoyed the discussion and want to listen back, you'll be able to find it there in a couple of days. There is an opportunity for Q&A. You should see the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screens. Please pop in questions for our panelists. There'll be an opportunity towards the end for Maeve to take some of those questions and to respond to any questions that you may have. We've also left open the chat box at the bottom of the screen. One of the nice things about an online webinar is that we get folks from all over, so feel free to pop in there who you are and where you're listening in from. It's always nice to know that we're speaking to folks from all over. Really, I suppose many people are wondering why we're focusing in on climate change in this event today. And obviously much of the media over the last 15 months has really been focused on the pandemic and how we get out of the pandemic. While we're still working our way through the exit from the pandemic, we've seen just, I suppose, in the last number of weeks with the G7 and the EU-US summit and those big existential questions that are ever present coming back to the fore on the international agenda. And of course, foremost among these is climate change and man-made climate change. We wanted to take this opportunity now to reflect on some of the exciting and hopeful work that's been done from the local right through to the global level to fight climate change and to support those most adversely affected by it. With our panel today, you'll have the opportunity to hear about the great work being done here in the US at the municipal level, at home in Ireland, and in Ireland's international development programme, and by some of our international development charity partners, particularly Concern Worldwide. Here in the States, many people know about Ireland as a place with 40 shades of green, but they know less about Ireland's commitment to the green agenda and to combating climate change. At home, the government is working through a new climate action bill, which will see Ireland commit itself to over 50% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, so some very ambitious targets there. And as well in Ireland, we're also rapidly making a shift towards renewable energy. Wind generation, for example, accounted for 40% of all of the electricity used in Ireland last year. And for those of you who've driven the Wild Atlantic Way, you'll know that there is plenty of capacity there to generate more wind energy. And we aim to have 70% of our electricity provided by wind in the coming decade, which is, I suppose, a very positive and large number. And as well, in Ireland's international development programme, climate action is one of the real pillars of what we're doing in our international development programme. And you'll hear a little bit more about that later on. We have a great number of panelists. You want to hear from them, not me, so I'll very briefly introduce them. We've got Commissioner Bridget Degnan. She's Cook County Commissioner for District 12 here in the Chicagoland area. She's from Chicago's northwest side, and she holds degrees in environmental engineering and in law. She served for 2 years in the US Peace Corps in Mali before working as an environmental engineer right throughout the US. And then she undertook her law career, where she's practiced law in the public and the private sectors, including as the Deputy Counsel General for the Illinois Department of Public Health. She was elected to the Cook County Board of Commissioners in November of 2018. We also have Ambassador Mary O'Neill. Ambassador O'Neill took up her position as Ireland's ambassador in Dar es Salaam earlier on this year. A specialist in development, she's worked in Ireland's embassy in Sierra Leone and Liberia, and brings a wealth of experience in international development from her time with international organisations and global charities. We also have Yousaf Jogezai, who's the country director for Concern Worldwide in Malawi. Many of you here in the Midwest will know of the great work of Concern, so we look forward to hearing a bit more of his work. He's a dedicated development and humanitarian professional with experience in Turkey, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, South Sudan, Bangladesh, Sierra Leone, and Pakistan. He joined Concern Worldwide in 2007 and since July 2018, he's been the Country Director for Concern Worldwide, Malawi. And then we have Maeve Higgins, who'll be known to many of you as the author of Maeve in America, Essays by a Girl from Somewhere Else. She's a contributing writer to the New York Times. She's a comedian who's performed all over the world, and including on Chicago's very own NPR News Quiz, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, a personal favorite of ours here in the Consulate. She's also the co-host of Neil deGrasse Tyson's podcast and television show Star Talk and the climate justice podcast Mothers of Invention. Maeve, before handing over to you to speak to the panel, I just really wanted to ask you about your own engagement with climate action. And I first learned of it through the wonderful podcast Mothers of Invention, which looks at feminist solutions to climate change. I suppose, really, what brought you to that podcast? What was your motivation for it?
Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited to hear everybody. And, you know, so yeah, I do this podcast and it's about climate solutions, and it's kind of, as you said, like a feminist look at what we can do about climate chaos. And the reason, honestly, the reason I started doing it was for two reasons, right? One is my co-host, who goes by the name of Mary Robinson, who was president of Ireland when I was a child, and who is this icon. She was the UN Human Rights Commissioner, and she also has a background in law, actually, similar to yourself, Commissioner. And, you know, she's this, like, what she worked on for many years is the intersection of human rights, like human rights and climate change, and that's climate justice. So she's like fixated on that and does amazing work on that. And I, as you said, I'm a comedian, I'm a writer, and I felt a great paralysis around, you know, this term climate change. I kind of thought it was this huge existential crisis, which it is. But I thought my role in that was to be scared and not do anything and not understand it and just be sort of head in the sand. So I think to do a podcast about it where we met all of these women who are working on climate justice solutions, that really woke me up into, oh, actually, of course, there are ways through this, there are ways around this. And that was a few years ago. And since then, I've just been so interested. So thank you very much for having this today. And also, Kevin, I noticed you took it as an opportunity to show off about how windy Ireland is.
It's bracing, it's bracing. That's why you have such beautiful views.
You'll all know if you know how much wind we have in Ireland. I never thought that would be something we could show off about.
Well, Maeve, I know you're going to have conversations with our panelists here, and you mentioned women doing great work to target climate change. Now you're going to have a chance to speak to Commissioner Degnan. I'm going to turn off my camera now so you'll get to focus in on Maeve and our panelists.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin. I'm allowed to call him Kevin because we met before on Zoom. So everybody else, you have to call him Consulate. So let's start with the local. As you know, this event is really based in Chicago, right? Because it's, you know, the Consulate in Chicago, and we have the Cook County, you know, I mean, the Commissioner, which is a huge thing. And also, Commissioner Degnan, I understand you're on vacation, but you've taken this time. So we really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Maeve, I would not miss this. I am so excited to be here today with this amazing panel. Everybody has such unique backgrounds, and I know in our prep for this, everybody's really excited about this topic. So thank you so much for having me here to discuss something that I think is critically important to all of us. Critically important,
yes. So, I mean, it's funny to know where to start with you because it seems to be almost a lifelong commitment to working on solutions. But let's talk about, you know, since you've been working as commissioner since 2018, like what's it been like in Chicago, and what changes have you A, made, and B, do you want to make? Because I know it's not easy.
So, you know, there are limits to the authority of a county commissioner. And so, you know, the city of Chicago is run by the mayor and a city council. And then a county commissioner helps with the operations of the county, which includes the city and about over 100 municipalities in addition to the city of Chicago. So the area
counties in the US, is it?
Pardon?
Cook County is one of the biggest counties in the US, I think.
It's the second biggest county, Maeve. So the district I represent is on the north and northwest side of the city of Chicago. And when I was running for this position, I pledged to make the environment one of my top policy priorities as an elected official, because number one, it's something I know a lot about. And number two, it's something that I feel naturally I'm very passionate about. So I think one of the most important things we can do as elected officials is to lead by example by passing environmentally focused legislation. And with that, there are a lot of different environmental topics, but the things that I've passed, I think, number one that I'm really proud of, the first thing I passed for legislation was the creation of a Cook County Environmental Commission. So when I first came in, I went and talked to all these organizations that were environmentally based. They were focused on policy. And while these organizations did a great job developing the policy, where the rubber meets the road, there was a hindrance to getting that policy executed. So the commission that I generated allows 9 different people to sit on this commission. I am the chair of that commission, and we decided to have this group of like-minded experts, environmentally focused experts. We have somebody from the museums. We have in the private sector. We have somebody who is from with an educational slant. We have somebody who's an economist, different sectors of the county. And we selected 3 main agenda items that we wanted to move forward and execute over the course of 2 years. The first one was to increase the tree canopy throughout the county, including the south and west sides of the city, which have up to 70% fewer trees. The second one was to create a better space for large-scale industrial composting. A lot of our food waste goes straight into landfills, and it could be diverted into composting and anaerobic composting in order to reduce the amount of food waste. We're really thinking about large-scale complexes like your jails, your hotels, your museum campus, public arenas, places that generate a lot of food waste. And then secondarily, homes that would have the ability to get containers to divert their food waste. And the third thing, which was supposed to be the easiest lift on this list of 3, was to amend the City of Chicago's weed ordinance. So cities across the world basically have really focused on green grass in front of homes. What we'd like to encourage people to do is have a native garden to really eliminate that grass, because that native garden sucks in more stormwater. It's better for carbon sequestration, and it increases the pollinators and butterflies that are in the area. So I drafted that legislation, and I expect it to be filed by my city partners this month in City Hall. So that was very cool.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so interesting. We've talked on our climate justice podcast about trees and where you find them in cities. And I didn't know that about Chicago, because it's often like the kind of more neglected areas. And it's also an issue of racial justice. Often you find more trees in whiter parts of town. Like, it's kind of extraordinary, isn't it? And trees, if any, we have people joining us. Where is everybody? There's people in Alabama, there's people in Iowa. A lot of places in the US in the summer, it is hot, and it is getting hotter. And spending New York summers, if you don't have trees, you're in a lot of trouble. So that sounds so practical. And also, who's going to argue with more trees?
You would be surprised when you're an elected official. There's always somebody that doesn't want you to do what you want to do.
Okay.
But you're right, Maeve. I mean, I think environmental justice is social justice, and there are areas that have dealt with systemic racism for years, and the attention hasn't been focused on those communities. We need to pivot now and make sure that those communities, that there's parity there.
Amazing, amazing. Okay, well, thank you so much for that. Let's keep chatting, and in the meantime, let's introduce another one of our panel. So I think maybe next, should we hear from Ambassador O'Neill? Are you ready to go now? We find you this evening, your time, in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. So thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to move on now to kind of, I suppose, you're representing Ireland, and you're in Tanzania. so there's kind of a nations, you're looking at nations in other nations. So can you give us a national, your national platform, Ambassador?
I will, and I first just say hello to all the panelists, and it's a joy to be joining with you. It's 8 p.m. here in Tanzania. It's dark, and but it's great to be joining this panel, and thank you so much for the invitation. But just listening to one thing that Commissioner Degnan mentioned about, leading by example, and I think, that was one of the first things we looked at here in the embassy. As an embassy, as a workplace, as an employer, how can we lead by example? So we started greening the embassy in 2019, and sometimes people, when you think of greening, I think of Chicago and the river running green on St. Patrick's, but this was a much more an infrastructure project. All our carports are covered in solar panels. We've reduced our drawdown on the energy grid here by 64% through our solar works. We harvest rainwater from the roof. All that water is used for our washrooms and water supplies here. We have a green team amongst the staff at the embassy, and they are just fantastic advocates here in the embassy, but with our partners and with local and national government as well. So in some ways, by kind of saying, okay, we're going to lead by example and we're going to do something in our workplace, we have other embassies coming to us asking us, how do you do that? How is it that the officers of the embassy, when they interact with others, are such strong advocates for climate action? And it's because, we have done it as part of how we work in our workplace. But that's just one aspect. I suppose the major thing here is around our development assistance program, and how our development assistance program is addressing some of the impacts of climate change, particularly on women and girls. And, Tanzania is not a country that, say, generates a lot of emissions, but it's in part of the world, similar to Yousaf's part of the world, where the impact of climate change is very keenly felt by populations, obviously, who didn't generate climate change.
I think about that sometimes, because I've lived primarily in Europe and in the US, and the US, historically is the biggest emitter. Now it's been overtaken, but historically has emitted the most carbon. And as you said, you're living there, right, with people feeling the effects, but they didn't cause the problem. And that seems so kind of base level unfair. And how is it playing out in Tanzania? Like, what do you think are the kind of biggest challenges there, caused by climate?
And like, one of the biggest challenges, as I say, is the impact on women and girls. And in two particular areas that we focus on, one of them is kind of the dryland areas in the center of the country. So these are areas which would have had very predictable rains. They're mainly agriculturalists. We talk about farmers. People think farmers are men. When you hear farmers, I grew up with a vision that most farmers are men. Most farmers are women, So, and traditionally, like when we speak and when we talk with farmers, they talk about, they could predict within 2 or 3 weeks when the rain was coming. They could prepare land, put in seed, watch it germinate, have a fair level of confidence through the growing season, and have a certain kind of certainty of having food for their families. And, that kind of confidence in the predictability of rains is gone. And so, and that has many impacts. You find women and girls have to travel for long distances to get water. They're, queuing up water points. It's time that could be used on other things. If there's safety issues, girls are kept out of school to collect water. So there's a lot of impacts, and a lot of the work we're doing with our partners is helping those communities adapt. So, adapting is such an important part, kind of living and coping with the lack of predictability around rains. So we work very closely with the national government, with local government, with civil society partners on, understanding the impacts, because we're still learning what these impacts are, and looking at coming up with solutions that are accessible for poorer people. So, you know, it's important that that people, you know, are able to implement solutions and they're not imposed on them, that they are part of the process in adaptation.
Well,
the other
sorry, I'm so glad you mentioned accessibility, because, you know, in some conversations around what can we do about climate change, people literally say we can go to Mars, like we can start again on another planet, right? But you're there, you're in Tanzania and you're meeting up with like girls who are like, oh, I can't go to school, I have to stay at home because like my mom needs me to get water and we were expecting this to happen and this didn't happen. So like, what are the things that help, and how do you adapt to that kind of unpredictability?
Well, there is a number of things, like in water, it's kind of making it nearer. Sometimes it is wells that have to go deeper, rainwater harvesting, but making better use of storage, making better use of wastewater, different seeds that mature faster, more drought resistant. So there's a lot of technical solutions, but it's also, you know, selling those technical solutions and people and being willing and able to take them up and adopt them. So that's a very important part of it. But I think another aspect of our work here is, you know, being a global partner of solidarity with countries that are feeling the impact of climate change. Like this year now we have COP26. I keep missing which one we're at, but COP26 I think is coming up this year. Yeah. In November in Glasgow. So look, we're hitting into a phase now over the summer where there will be a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion around climate. And part of our work here is working with the Tanzanian government in helping them to participate helping them in their preparations to participate in these global conferences. Because, you know, it is, as you said, Maeve, climate and climate change can be like a mammoth thing, right. So big, so huge, and you can feel very powerless in terms of your element of control over this. But it is so important that we, you know, as individuals, we act as global citizens, but as countries that we act in solidarity, and that we do our best to influence other countries, you know, that to be able to work together, both in terms of reduction of our own emissions, but most importantly, helping those that are feeling the pain and feeling the kind of disruption in their livelihoods, helping them with options, and helping them with, as I said, options that are accessible to them.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. I mean, so interesting about, you know, so many people in the global north or whatever, you know, they kind of say it's coming, climate change is coming, but as we know, it's already here, right? It's already in Chicago, actually. It's already in, you know, certainly in Tanzania. And I love that you made the connection between, you know, Tanzania is a small country, Ireland is a small country, like, you know, both, you know, rural populations who are increasingly becoming urban, and to stand with, you know, the Tanzanians and kind of say, listen, this is what we've got to say, and at COP to make those voices louder so that it's not always, you know, the big guns in the room. But speaking of the big guns in the room, Yousaf, we'd love to speak to you. We'd love to hear from you. And also global, right? Concern is this huge concern worldwide. You're all over the world. So will you give us your perspective, Yousaf? I know you've been with Concern for a very long time. You're an honorary Irishman at this point. So welcome to the conversation. How are you doing?
Thank you very much for having me in this very important conversation. And I'm glad to get the honorary Irish title from you as well. I've had this from many people, so very much appreciated.
You like okay, thanks. So So how are you doing there in Malawi? What would you say that, the work of Concern? I think a lot of people are probably familiar with Concern, and there's huge support for this amazing organization, from Ireland and from the US too. So will you let us know, how have you been? You've been there for 3 years, is that right?
Yes, that's right. It's almost 3 years now in Malawi.
Wow. And so what would you say are the challenges that that Malawians are facing, and how would you say Concern is working together with them?
Sure. I think we have quite a lot of similarities what Ambassador O'Neill just mentioned. So there may be some of the repetition, but I will try to cover the other aspects. Mm-hmm. So, as you know, Concern works in the most vulnerable communities in extreme poverty and people who have been traditionally been left behind. And we work in across 24 countries in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. And in terms of climate change, we already see the impact on the ground, and which are hitting the poorest first, including those who are least responsible for causing it. And even here in Malawi, we see now there is even more frequency and intensity of these disasters, such as devastating floods, droughts, and cyclones. And speaking of cyclone, Malawi was very badly hit by Cyclone Idai in 2019. And we witnessed how climate change is causing very heavy impact on the vulnerable communities, which is the prime objective of Concern to support those communities. So, and also for a small country like Malawi, where majority of the population, over 80%, their source of livelihood is from the land. And climate shocks such as drought, flooding, and strong weather patterns are now a regular occurrence. So, and especially there is very little industry, it's a landlocked country, and agriculture, as in other places, is the worst affected by climate change. And in Malawi, majority of the population rely on agriculture and are small landhold farmers.
I see.
So,
yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like you kind of had to do the two things, right? You were doing the kind of long-term developmental work, with the farmers on the ground and how we're working with them season after season. But then there's an emergency situation. There's, what's called a climate event, right? Where something like a flood, a drought, or in that case, a cyclone sort of comes in suddenly. And so then you also, as the people and the organizations have to deal with that. So you have to divide your energy, or how did you do that?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Concern is a dual mandated organization. We respond to emergencies, either that's natural disasters or conflict. And we also do long-term development work to address the root causes of those disasters, or help the vulnerable communities to prepare. So whatever we do, we always prepare for responding to emergencies within the organization, that we have the appropriate system, staffing, and the ability so that we can very quickly respond to emergencies and relieve the suffering. And then we don't leave those communities just to support them with the immediate needs, not just when the media leaves. Concern is an organization who stays and support those communities to rebuild and recover and also prepare for the future work. For example, one of the area which we emphasize is the disaster risk reduction. That's
good, disaster reduction. I mean, because it's like we already discussed, there's not much you can do as, you know, a Malawian citizen to stop a cyclone, right? So it's like, okay, well then adaptation and being prepared. And then, so what is disaster reduction?
Yeah, there are several aspects of to reduce the reduction. These include like that the impact of weather-related risks are having low impact. By that, we support the vulnerable communities to plan ahead of potential shocks and also establish early warning systems.
Right.
We work with the Malawian government at national level and also at the community level, so that the people, those who are more at risk, can access climate information. And Concern works with those communities to establish community-based early warning system. And we do that through training of the communities, the local authorities, and help them in preparing their disasters plans. And you very rightly said, even if we cannot have major impact at the global level, but at least we support those communities to minimize the damage when they are hit by the either flooding or cyclones or drought.
Thank you for that. And I see, Commissioner Degnan, you're nodding your head, and I suppose a lot of this is your wheelhouse, right? Because you're thinking of your own population there in Cook County and thinking how, you know, I mean, what are you thinking? It's like, yes, it is helpful to have these warnings, early warning signs, or this kind of community involvement, or what's ringing a bell with you there?
Well, I think, you know, everything that we've talked about here today, like Ambassador O'Neill and Concern Worldwide, and the reality of it, I think, too, is that we have the technology to go to Mars. We have the statics and the dynamics and booster systems. So all we really need to do is focus on the technology to make sure that our world and that our environment is well protected. And that really comes back to the legislation. Because we have the technology available already, what we need is to make sure that we have the bravery of people that are in elected positions to pass laws to say that these environmental issues are human rights. They're all of our rights. And so we shouldn't be worried about getting voted out of office because it's somehow anti-business. It's pro-business. We all, you know, go to shop at businesses. We go to work at businesses. And so I think if we look at it holistically and look at one hand helping the other, that's what we really need to focus on. And I think me as a legislator, each one of us as citizens who have other electeds need to be calling our legislators. I think we need to be calling them to say, this is something that's really important to me, and I need you to focus on it. I need you to vote for it. I need you to help write it. And so those are things that I think are really important as, you know, as we move forward. And like Ambassador O'Neill said, these are such huge issues, right? That sometimes I think our coping mechanisms push them off to the side because they're so big, we don't feel like we can tackle them. So that's why we need to elect people with hard science backgrounds to these positions who can talk about them, who can work with scientists, who can pass that legislation. I mean, even a styrofoam ban, which Maeve should be so easy to pass.
A styrofoam ban? Yeah, yeah.
Styrofoam, I mean, styrofoam basically never breaks down. It never deteriorates. But yet our landfills in the US are filled with up to 30% plastic, you know, single-use plastic, styrofoam, things like that. We need to pull those things out.
Because my wedding dress was made out of styrofoam, I feel guilty. I'm kidding. But you know, it's so true what you're saying, that this, unless, you know, the people we're talking now about the US and also Ireland, unless we engage with our legislators, then how will you even know what we're thinking? And I think it seems like it can seem overwhelming, but you're right. For the first time in New York last year, there was a lot of fish dying in the Hudson River, and it was just something I saw with my own eyes. I was like, what is happening here? They didn't have enough oxygen in the water, and I saw them dying. And you know, I just wrote to the local councilwoman, and we spoke about it, and it was much easier than I thought. It's like a step-by-step action, I think, is something to do, and it's something that you then get engaged with. And as Ambassador O'Neill was saying, things like, you know, greening the infrastructure of her, of the, I don't know, was it the ambassador's residence or the ambassador's office, and putting out the solar panels, it just ticks something in your brain where you think, oh yeah, that I must remember to do that. Or like seeing a styrofoam cup, it's like, I can do something about that. But wait, is there now a styrofoam ban, or what's happening with that in Chicago?
So I helped draft a styrofoam ban at the county level, and the city had looked at one too. And I know that they were thinking about filing it, and then Corona hit. Oh, and because the restaurant and hospitality industry was hit so hard, it's really tone deaf. You don't want to pile on top of it, right? But I have talked to a number of small and medium-sized businesses, and they have said most of them don't even use it. Like Dunkin' Donuts is a big one, that they used to use styrofoam. Really, consumer pressure pushed them to no longer use it. But it's still used by a lot of small mom and pops. And I've talked to them, and they said, we know it's coming. We've already adjusted, you know, our pricing. As soon as it hits, this legislation, we'll stop using it. They just need the incentive.
Right.
Right. And so it's like that, just not with styrofoam, but we have Amazon in the US, right? Amazon, all of our shopping is lending now towards online. So now we have Amazon Prime trucks and FedEx delivery vehicles. And I think there needs to be that counterbalance where if we're shopping online and we're not frequenting our local businesses, those trucks need to be carbon free. They need to be electric vehicles or something that's not using fossil fuels. They're making a ton of money, right? And I think long term, those cars cost less to maintain because they're not requiring extra oil changes. They don't require gasoline. So it's an upfront cost, but a long-term savings for the environment, and really for those, it's pro-business if you look at it that way.
Right, and I appreciate you bringing that up, that it doesn't have to be, you know, going against one another. Everyone actually can quite easily work together, except we have to remember some people literally make a profit from, you know, the oil and gas industries. And so that's what we're up against. They're the ones who are really, I think, you know, worth taking on. It's not like we're fighting with the mom and pop store, or we're going to crush local business or whatever. It's yeah. So I was going to look at the questions here. There's a question: does Ireland work with Concern Overseas? I think, does the Irish government work with Concern Overseas? I think that's what the question is, from Tom. Could you answer that, Yousaf?
Yeah, sure. Excuse me. Yeah, Ireland is our biggest donor, and the Irish government and also the Irish public. And we very proudly say we are an Irish organization. Even if we get funding from other sources, we still, like in wherever we work, we are considered as an Irish organization.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. As an Irish taxpayer, that makes me happy. And thanks to all of the individual donors. Now let's see. Somebody asked, never thought climate change would have unbalanced impacts on men and women differently. Does this mean that climate change is now part of all human and women's rights discussions at the UN and in global forums? Excellent, excellent question. I might throw it to you, Ambassador O'Neill, because that was something that surprised me too. And it was something that Mary Robinson learned when she worked with the UN. And a lot of times during her travels in East Africa, when she met African women farmers, as you mentioned, who were the ones getting hit first and worst. And often the women are looking after the kids, right? So when there's a climate event, they're stuck. And so I'll let you answer the question fully there, Ambassador O'Neill, if you wouldn't mind.
Definitely. You know, climate change, there is a gendered difference in how it impacts. And, you know, as Yousaf mentioned, it's across a number of things. That like, who are the providers of food? Especially in African society, who are the main providers of food? Who is tasked with ensuring the family is fed? Now, that's nearly always women. That's part of their gendered role. Water, whose task is it to get water? That is nearly always women as well. So that when these aspects come under stress, they're the first people to feel the stress. And you know, they take on that additional burden of trying to compensate for the challenges that climate change you know, it has in their lives. So it is. I've worked and lived in many places in Africa, and I remember in 2003 in South Sudan, being absolutely, you know, going out into villages, talking to people, and being absolutely shocked at the problems that the climate change was causing for women, and the silence around it. You know, because it wasn't you know, a big important national or a big important subnational political event, there was a silence around these very difficult challenges that were facing women and girls around those areas. So it is very, I think we have to look at these things through with a gender lens to see how it impacts on men, women, girls and boys differently, because the solutions and the answers have to take into account those differences as well.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that about the solutions and the answers, because, you know, as we all know, when you're in a pickle, you're probably the one likely to find a way out. And like, that's what I learned from making this podcast. It's called Mothers of Invention for a reason, because the women that, you know, Ambassador O'Neill met, and there's women all over the world who face these huge challenges trying to protect their home and their family. And often they're the ones who come up with the solutions. Now, be that sort of the stove they're using in their home, be that ways of refrigerating food, or even be that we spoke to one extraordinary woman who's lives on a reservation. She's in the First Nations in the US and is solar powering her home. It's one of the most unelectrified regions of the whole of the US. And she's using solar power to power her own home and her neighbors' homes. And we also spoke to a river protector in Australia, who's again an Indigenous woman who works as a river protector and is also a midwife, and sort of protects both people and planet with her scientific knowledge and with her Indigenous knowledge, right? So I think that's where, you know, where the solutions can often come from as well. And that's a really great, you know, that's a really great thing that you brought up, Ambassador O'Neill, that like, they're the ones who know, so they're the ones with the wisdom, and they're the ones to listen to, right? Let me see some other questions. This is from Rob. Rob, do cities and counties that are leading on combating climate change help those smaller ones that are less sure what to do? Now, that's a great question. I might pass it to you, Commissioner, because certainly living in under you know, living in America when Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement, it was a sense of kind of, oh my goodness, what is this government doing? But then I was looking, well, city governments, county governments, they're acting, they keep doing the good work, whatever is going on at a federal level. So Commissioner, could you speak to Rob's question?
Yes, and so Maeve, I think that's a really interesting component of our federal government. And while we rely on them in the US so much for large scale administration of programs, even think coronavirus and getting those vaccines out to us. When Trump was in office and he did cut some of those programs that the feds provided, the cities, the states, and the counties really stepped in to wrap their own communities with services that were needed and kind of filled in those holes. So it's kind of like, it's great in a way to see communities really coming together, So at the county level of government, there is an umbrella organization called NACO. It's the National Association of County Organizations. I belong to that in Cook County. And I actually this year was lucky enough to get on to one of the committees on environment, energy, and sustainability. So I go to those meetings. You know, they've been remote for the last year.
Love that you say, I was lucky enough to get onto this committee. To me, that sounds like a lot of extra work.
It is a lot of extra work, but this is my full-time job and I love it. So I feel very fortunate.
Good.
So in connection with that committee, you know, other counties, large and small around the country get together and we share our stories, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And so I can pull in from those different communities and share things with Cook County and come back. And I will say, you know, the harder you're willing to work, the more you're seen as a leader in whatever space or bucket. And so I'm proud to have the environment as my space and bucket. And so I collaborate with some of the folks on our Cook County board who are really into social justice. And because the environment, as I mentioned before, we believe that there are social justice and environmental justice, really things in the same bucket. We can come together and whip votes around things that really affect both of us. So yes, there is the ability to collaborate county and city-wise. It really, you know, to know who's up for election, to know how hard they'll work and what they're doing. I think in the US, like, you know, less than 50% of the people vote. And that's why it's so important to make sure that you're not just engaged during election time, but that you're staying engaged throughout that cycle. So you know, how hard are your folks working? What are they focused on? And I think, Maeve, to kind of end out that question is, I think everybody else feels like they're constantly connecting with their elected officials. And I know from my friends and colleagues in Illinois, we don't get as much constituent calls and requests as I think the general population thinks we do. And we welcome that. So, you know.
Okay, good. Well, your details are there in the chat. And also something that's like hearing from Yousaf, hearing from Ambassador O'Neill is making me think, and then hearing like, oh, 50% of people don't vote in the US. And there, you know, there are other, that's, you know, not blaming anyone, whatever. But it makes me think like, okay, when we stand up for ourselves or when we ask for something that we need in our local community in America or in Ireland, it also has a knock-on effect, you know, when we're talking about like people suffering from the effects of a cyclone in Malawi. Like it's not just for us, because the problem with climate and the opportunity in climate is that it's everybody, like everybody is connected. So I'm really, thank you for bringing up again that point of engagement with your legislators. And before we come to the end, there's a good question here from Taigo Bryn, who was wondering about, so you talked, Commissioner, about like how different counties are connected and the NACO organization. So what he wanted to know was, we hear about COP26, these big climate talks. Is that just countries represented? Are there counties? Are there citizen voices? Are there grassroots organizations? And if not, I don't think they're included in COP, are they? In the COPs. They could be in the room. I'd love to, if somebody could jump in to correct me. They could be in the room. I am not sure. But if you're not, you know, an elected official, if you're not kind of a high up, what is the best way to get your point across, do you think? And I'd love to hear from maybe from you, Yousaf, on that. Like, what do you advise people to do?
Yeah, no, that's again a very good question. So this year there are two big events which are happening. That the one is COP26 and the second one is UN Food Summit, in which Ireland is very much engaged at global level. So as an organization which works in the ground at the grassroots level, we have been engaged with our communities at the very dawn at the village level and also with the district authorities. So we have been getting their input and sharing it with our offices in Ireland, in UK, and through various civil society networks, which will be feeding into these two important events. So we are playing our role so that these are not just very high-level events. They should have the reality from the ground that what people think. So we are very active in that space.
Okay, that's great to hear. That's really great to hear. Thank you. Would either of you like to jump in on that question, Commissioner or Ambassador?
Yeah, just a quick one is that the COP26 will be on in November, and as well as, I say, the Food Summit will be on in Rome later on this year as well. But in a lot of countries, there is a lot of preparation for these, both with very strongly through civil society, but also through the political and technical side in so those preparations, I think in some ways, some things have been overshadowed a little bit by COVID, but we did have the Dublin Dialogues there in the last month, which is part of the preparation, and some of the subsidiary groups are working on the prep for COP as well. But, this is something that, within the various spheres of influence that people are living and working in, to look at the channels and look at the opportunities. And I would imagine that there will be an awful lot more media work on this over the next few months as we lead up towards the COP. But it's the big five since 2015, so it's an important one.
That is a big one. Well, I love that the term spheres of influence, and I think we can all look at our own ones of those, even on social media. And the Consul Kevin Byrne is back in the room. Hello. Are you? I guess we're almost out of time. Is that why you're here? You're going to tell us to all go home? Have we no homes to go to?
Yeah, I was going to start to turn on and off the lights. No, yeah. It was just really, I know that we said we'd get it wrapped up within the hour. I know folks have to go back to their lunch. But I don't know, Commissioner Degnan, I think you were going to answer the question before. Sorry, before I flicked on my camera there. So I don't want to take your chance to speak. So go on ahead, please.
No, I think Yousaf and Ambassador O'Neill did a great job with that.
Perfect. Well, look, I might just then thank you all first to our attendees for joining and for all your engagement and your questions. Again, look, it's recorded, so it'll be posted on the DFA YouTube channel, and as well, Commissioner Degnan's going to put it on her site as well, so you can watch it for those of you here in Chicago. And then really it falls on me, the best honor of any event is to get to thank all of our panelists and our moderator for really bringing these issues and questions to life. Anytime you put an event together, you always have an idea of what the discussion might be like, and you'll hope that it'll hang together well. But I think really we learned a huge amount about how each of the areas that you work in are so connected. And as well, I mentioned this to Maeve when we spoke just before the event. I'm one of those people as well who sometimes feels a bit paralyzed by the size of the issue and the problem. And I was hoping that this would be a hopeful discussion. And I think all of you brought, a great degree of realism, but also a great degree of hope around the great work that you're all doing in your various different areas. So Maeve, it's so important to, to bring these questions and issues to a wider audience, and definitely through Mothers of Invention. If folks haven't listened to it, do download it. It was definitely my podcast that got me through the pandemic. It's both hopeful and funny and informative and educational. So definitely download that. Commissioner Degnan, great to hear of the work that you're doing and the passion and expertise that you bring to it. Ambassador O'Neill, I've had the chance just to work with you very briefly and always so impressed by your work and your perspective. So thank you for sharing those today. And Yousaf, our honorary Irishman, thank you so much for the work that you are doing. It's, I come away from this feeling really very, very, very hopeful. So thank you all for your time today. Thank you for your time in advance preparing for this. So really to thank you all.
Thanks for having us. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely seeing you. Bye.